Okay, I think we're recording, gentlemen. Good morning, good afternoon. How are we all?
Hot.
Hot.
Excellent.
Excellent.
Good.
Welcome, Jukka. Welcome back, Vlad.
Thanks, Mike.
Britain, show the people who like watching on YouTube your futuristic shades.
Yeah, these are the Oakley Sutras. You can only get these in the future. So
Or from
don't try
Britain.
to buy them. Be patient.
Yeah.
Be available shortly.
So, gentlemen, how are we? Let's quickly go around, just a little update on how things are going. We'll start with the regular cast. Mark, how are you, buddy? How's things in Sweden?
Hot, 29 degrees for the last few days. Beach at the end of my street, so that's nice. Yeah, football-wise, it's been quite normal. We had a camp at AIK last week with 170 kids, so we just split it over 2 football pitches. Worked really, really well. Leagues are going on as normal. The National League Senior has started without spectators. So football is still happening, although the kids now, because they started in April, they're on a break for the summer, which is good as well.
Right.
So yeah, it's okay. I'm kind of looking forward to getting most of July off. So
Smashing. So lots of beach, lots of sunbathing, lots of DJing.
yeah, exactly. Actually, I'm going to play a garden party on Saturday.
Good. That's really good. Really good.
Sweet.
Britain, obviously you've been to the future. How's things outside of the future?
The future's pretty grim. Just kidding. No. So we, the usual format of tryouts where, nobody's safe. We kind of have this Hunger Games approach to player selection, and everybody rushes to the fields and tries to get a spot, and coaches try to pick the best players and put them all together so we have a show to watch, throughout the year. And so we just finished up that process, and getting registrations and everything normal. We did have a family member report 1 case of COVID, which means that the players that have been in contact with that player all have to quarantine for 2 weeks. And it's new territory for us, but we're playing it safe. I think statistically the kids ought to be pretty safe at this point, and we just have to be careful and not contribute to the spread, I guess.
I don't envy you on the tryouts, mate. I mean, whose destiny did you destroy?
It's after our last podcast, just to kind of touch on it, I realized that a lot of this is not really in the interest of the learning of the player. A lot of it is in the interest in the development of the player. We see a high potential player or multiple, high potential or highly skilled players, and we're like, oh, just imagine what it would be like for all of those kids to play on the same team. Wouldn't that be fun to watch? And all of the actions, I think, amongst the parents, in North America at least, would suggest that we're more in it for entertainment than anything else. Like we're setting up the spectacle. There's only really one reason that I can think of is to pool all of the best players together on one team, and create a system where they're traveling 200 to 600 kilometers to go and play other teams. And it's not necessarily to affect the challenge point, because you can find that challenge point locally.
Yeah.
Right.
So there's multiple mini combines.
Yeah. And it's like, oh, just imagine if we got them all together, it would be so much fun to watch. Yeah. And you go into the games, and the kind of the ill behavior towards referees is kind of I guess it's a form of life in a way, but it's like we're watching Major League Baseball, yelling at the umpire and everything. It's fun to watch your team win. So I think everything's come down to that. So that's my latest cynical view.
No,
it's turning into a pageantry.
It is a pageant. It's not the first time that I've heard that. Actually, a good friend of mine that coaches in the area, he would mention that it's a pageant, and You know, that said, I think being a little more aware of that, I think we're in a better place to address it, to make sure that we can bring the focus back to the experiences of children.
That's the first step, isn't it? That's the first step. You're aware, you're investigating, you're looking at better options. So good for you. Vlad, welcome back.
Thanks for having me. Over here, we got just what Mark said, plus 29. And as soon as I was done with my duties in the office, I exploited the weather and the opportunity to go outside and have a swim and have a run in the forest. I don't have such fabulous glasses, but you know, have to manage with what I have.
You're gonna need some. You're gonna need some. And I'm pleased to obviously introduce Jukka. Now, Jukka, can you say your last name for me?
Yes, it's Tiikkaja. Even the Finns don't get it right, so it's rather complicated.
Yeah, well, I'm definitely not getting it right. And you are you're head of education, sports, exercise, and well-being at an institution, correct?
Yes, I am, and I could continue the talk we had just briefly and show you the glimpse. It's nice weather and lots of sports happening. So
look at that.
Restrictions are lifted in Finland, so it's kids are getting back to sports, kids and also a little bit older kids.
Living the dream there. It looks like the field of dreams. Smashing, and you're watching your daughter's soccer game, I believe.
Yes. I promised to be a kind of a assistant coach. So whenever I have time, I'll join the practices and games. So they are about to kick off in 30 minutes or so. But it's all taken care of. So other people are taking care of that at the moment. I'm on my mobile, so if you don't mind, I could switch off the video connection. So just to keep the audio. So just to say hi.
Yeah, no problem. And we'll obviously there'll be no bad language once that game kicks off. I'm sure you'll be very well.
Yeah.
Good.
And you don't want to see my facial gestures after the game starts. So
Exactly.
Get that excited. So yeah.
Exactly. So Jukka. So welcome, obviously, to the pod. Let's just explore a little bit more about what it is you do, and then we'll dive more into some of your experiences and really just go off that conversation point to expand.
Okay, thanks first of all for having me to join the discussion. Almost past 20 years I've more or less worked in coach education, mostly in Finland. I'm mostly working at the higher education, so being responsible for Haaga-Heria University of Applied Sciences, but at the same time I've tried to stay involved at the practical level. So I work with the Finnish Federation, developing their coach education system, and also 2 times abroad. So once in Asia, kicking off the Asian office for the International Ice Hockey Federation, and the past 2 years before coming back to Vierumäki, I was working for Slovak Federation, kind of responsible for the overall system development. More or less looking at kind of the coach education or how in general, how do we set up the system to best support the learning and development in general.
Brilliant. Yeah, well, I know that a lot of us on here, we've had many people who are doing similar, or exploring similar concepts to try and obviously make their environment more optimal. Just tell us a little bit more about your current role and what you've been working on. And I know that a lot of it's around obviously the culture around coach education. So let's start there, and then we'll go from that point.
Yes, so the current work mostly that I have in Vierumäki is to kind of oversee the education, sports, exercise, all in all. So it's kind of a role that combines both the strategic levels and operative levels. I don't get to be so much involved anymore at the operative level, trying to move things forward. But especially in the past roles, I had a chance to kind of try and implement this, what we call, whether it's athlete or student-centered approach, or to create a culture where the focus is on the learning outcomes, and the learner itself, whether it's the study context or sport context, and how do we build that, how the culture influences the fact how we kind of perceive the world, how we react, how we behave with the athletes or with the students, and how do we then at the institutional level, when we run things, how can we change this adaptive behavior? What do we have to do in terms of organizing ourselves, in terms of kind of a performance development system at the staff level to try and help people to kind of overcome their habits? Teachers, like coaches, they usually work the way they've been worked with, and if you kind of want to change the approach and be more learner centered, work from the motivation, try and develop the environment that kind of appropriately challenges and supports the development. How do we basically, as an institution, how we can kind of introduce this kind of and facilitate this kind of change process in Slovakia? Kind of or before that experience, I was more idealistic. That if you just stay persistent with the course, everything's possible. But during those 2 years, I came to realize that it's all of this is heavily influenced by how the society views the role of the coach or the teacher, and how all other institutions work, how the education system works, what are the needs of the business system. So if the country is more or less operated with the traditional assembly line business, then it's really hard, where basically staff members are expected to do what they are told and not to think outside of the box, not to be creative. Then it's extremely difficult to create a learning system where you would kind of encourage different type of qualities. What many of the Western countries are now, of course, they are facing that to develop the business side, you more or less rely on country like Finland. We don't have many natural resources. We rely on people getting better all the time, trying to create and find new ways, new solutions, create new innovations, and kind of create something out of that in terms of business-wise that would kind of support the society. But if you don't have this basic drive, if you are, like many countries are still in this phase where they more rely on this kind of a assembly line setup, usually the school system is also then something that basically supports the development of more or less the traditional fixed mindset type of approach, that okay, you just do what you are told, follow the manual, you are able to do the same work whether you are in Britain or India, going back to the history of that system or the Victorian school system. So this is quite a long monologue about this whole phenomenon, but these are some of the issues that I've had a chance to kind of work with, and some of the, you could perhaps say, conclusions that sort of I've personally drawn based on that experience.
Jukka, these your conclusions are quite similar to mine. This Tayloristic assembly line and the Victorian school system. It's still quite an inherent barrier to any changes.
Yes.
Particularly if we take it just in sport organizations, they just really are very, very strong social, cultural constraints that we're kind of trapped in some path of dependency. So it's really interesting, but I am finding, particularly in the last COVID, that there are questions being asked about this. and they're coming from a lot of younger coaches. So like tomorrow I'll be speaking with a national federation, but this has actually been pushed by a younger coach who's been persistently asking questions.
Yes,
so
yes.
even though we're not going to change everything, of course, but it's really exciting to hear a lot of young coaches. In your experience in your work in the university, in your work in sports education, have you seen any little ripples like this in the last few months? Where
yes, a lot. And of course, in Finland, it's easier. You see more and more this type of behavior. I think with some of those more traditional societies, the challenge is that how do we then support these people who understand what is being discussed here? Because what happens usually, based on my experience, that okay, well, we can perhaps motivate and inspire some of the people that okay, well, perhaps there's a better way of building things in terms of supporting that individual, whether it's athlete or student. But when usually what happens is that when that person then goes back to club level, kind of a traditional environment is again facing all the expectations of the parents and perhaps the club board and other people around. So usually then this kind of inspiration slowly fades away. And this is something that we are now in Finland starting with the new strategy for the Olympic Committee to discuss more, that how do we move this process forward at different levels. So it's not only coach educators having their discussion and then the club, you could say the leadership or the board people then having their own discussions and parents having their own discussion, but people coming together at the system level and discussing that, okay, what do we expect from the environment that we build for our kids, and what does that mean in terms of the expectations we have for the coaches or the board members or the operative management, for example, or the parents.
So if you correct me if I'm wrong, so instead of say a national governing body implementing a strategy, you're actually investigating through your own culture and the needs of your people by actually asking the people and people in certain positions at multi-levels, from university to coaching.
Yes,
teaching.
yeah.
Okay.
Yes, and of course, usually the governing bodies, mostly I think Finland, Sweden, probably not too much different, but usually they already, when they build their strategy, they involve the people who are involved. What are the expectations? So you can see this discussion going on, but what I've experienced is that some of these issues kind of are quite abstract and hard to grasp. So people are still, they are happy to discuss. They kind of see the point. It all sounds so good. But when they go back and you start thinking and discussing that, okay, what do we expect in terms of the behavior, and how do we set up the training environment? How do we expect coaches to behave and things like that? Then it already becomes much more difficult, and especially in those kind of moments when the pressure from the outside increases. So then people, even though they start to kind of learn and develop the new techniques, easily what happens when the pressure gets higher, they kind of lean back to the kind of the familiar old.
Yeah, you fall back in societal culture.
Yes. This is what I've kind of noticed, that there's a tendency, even for those kind of inspired people, that you have to have really strong kind of will to push this forward, to go through all those struggles, that you are actively all the time develop and discuss solutions, that okay, hey, this is what we agreed, instead of this, could we do this? And when you face again people question the choices and those solutions, then you still have the courage to explain further and demonstrate and show. And what we've noticed in some sports already in Finland, when we've kind of had this discussion in Finland, you could say we more or less started in hockey 2012. So it's already, we have I think there's enough time to go through this process. Then when you get to that point, it's easier. You get one person supporting the other, and again the second and third, and it's easier to start getting things moving when you all the time you get more and more examples how to do it, and when things start changing, you get also experience of the positive impact it has on the kids. And many young athletes from the more successful sports, they a lot of their career they've actually developed in this kind of culture where they have been challenged with questions, their autonomy has been supported and so forth.
Yeah, so it seems like that, and it's something I believe that we need to start building a lot of these education, if you want to call them, we just call them frameworks, so they'll be more flexible. We need to build them on well-being more. That means we focus. I mean, I know that Finland has been a lot in the news about its education, its school education, which it's very hard for us as an outsider to look. I mean, can you give us some insights into the school system, education, how it's been changing in Finland?
Yes, well, the education system was essentially now recently changed based on these same principles what I believe we are discussing
Okay.
here and what are common for us. But I think a lot of the success for the Finnish system was based on perhaps a little bit different things. Of course, you can see in traditional Finnish system also the facts that, well, Finnish kids go to school a little bit later, so they have time, people say that they have time to explore the nature, play, be kids longer. Usually they have long teacher-student relationships, so you get to kind of develop personal connection. You get to learn and know one another. You learn to treat different people differently, respectfully also when you get to know them more. Also, teachers through the history have had, in comparison with many other societies, more autonomy, and the schools have had more autonomy to implement new methods. So the education or the curricula is not so strictly governed by the national bodies than in many other countries. And I think some of those.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, but this is the impression that I have also, that in Canada it's quite strictly controlled and managed, and there's not so much space for freedom and so you could say independent thinking of the teachers or the schools. And now we are of course trying to preserve that, but also then also build kind of the curricula in school systems that also would have a little bit more flexibility also in terms of how you learn things, in what speed, at what period of time and so forth. That okay, everybody needs to have certain skill set, but people develop differently in different areas, and for us to support the kind of the autonomy, perceived competence, we need to kind of allow that to happen.
Yeah, Jukka, what I'm getting from this is that, and it's something it actually aligns with a lot of what we've discussed in the podcasts previously, and my own personal convictions, is that we have these coaching education structures that are really, and national structures which are just based on some Tayloristic assembly line lineage where coupling learning with performance at a snapshot, often just at a snapshot of time. But it seems what you're discussing in the direction Finland is taking, coupling learning and well-being.
Yes, and this is still, of course, we are in the middle of change. So, but this is what we try to change, that we wouldn't serve everybody the same treatment and kind of, but then you would expect the same results. That we are more talking now about the kind of the competencies, the objectives, that as a coach how do you need to work, how do you behave, how do you set up the training environment, how you work through the games, and then there should be certain flexibility in terms of how different people set up their learning process. For different people, it might be easier to learn some things through more traditional methods, but same methods may be completely wrong for some other people. And what we try to do, and what we Vlad also, I don't know if you discussed about this earlier, but what we try to do even with University of Applied Sciences, that to build a lot of this learning into the real environment. So combine the real coaching cases with the studies. So you kind of move the coaching process forward. You pause, you analyze, you discuss what happened, why it happened, and you reflect, and then you work.
So I have a question for you guys, and it's without these federations or governing bodies, what would we expect? What would you guys expect would happen with coaches in their behavior and their education? Like where would we lean?
I don't try and change or give the impression that I don't believe that we need any national governing bodies. Ideally, of course, national governing body, they understand this situation, and they are kind of the change agents and help. Let's say, like in Finland, a national governing body for any particular sport, then they support clubs in this change, but sometimes, especially in more developed sport, you may learn the best practices from the field, so to say. So you may have already some clubs that are really advanced in their thinking, in their methods, and of course, good national governing body also is able to benchmark those cases and help spread that information forward.
Yeah,
So
I just wonder if people as human beings, if we have a tendency to, because we have formed these structures, right? It's been kind of a natural emerging process to form these structures, and these governing bodies, whether it be at a club level or at a national level, have emerged pretty naturally. So I kind of wonder what would be the tendencies of, say, grassroots coaches without these supporting structures. Mike, what do you think it would look like in your neck of the woods to not have the organization of the structure, and if every team was more or less on its own?
Oh, I mean, culturally right now in Canada and North America, everything that Jukka had mentioned about kind of that assembly line, it's definitely there. So has that been created from the governing body, the approach, or is that just deeply embedded from all of the different governing bodies that have done it? I don't know. I mean, I would obviously go on the ladder that it's probably that it's just deeply embedded. I would see that the governing body has to try and facilitate conversations like we're having now to at least get possibly younger, or anyone, but as Mark said, the younger generation, to maybe start to probe and ask more questions, because I think that's the only way that you're ever going to get to a point where this can slowly start to evolve. I mean, if we leave them to our own devices, will the conversation ever change? I'm probably going to say not with the existing culture that's deeply embedded. But I just don't see it evolving anytime soon. I think if we left it alone, you'd see much of the same.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is, like, if you look at the example of COVID right now, we are in our province about to go back to programming, and we've built our programming really with the health and well-being at the forefront. We're actually not labeling groups. We're not doing teams. But the majority of other programs that we know that are probably going to surface in and around us, they're going to go back to the way it was. Just exactly go back to the way it was. But again, is that a part of awareness? Is that because I'm fortunate to have, you know, people like yourself at my disposal to explore these conversations and be curious? Probably. So I think that's where the governing body needs to take their role, is to just really poke holes in existing systems that are there.
Yeah. So I think, you know, I think as coaches, I think we have a tendency as we gain more experience, that we've been through the, you know, the process of, you know, guiding young children and everything. I think over time we become more patient. But I think initially we don't know what to expect, and we don't know what, you know, what's going to happen in the future. And it seems like we try to shorten the journey as much as possible to find out what's going to happen as quickly as possible. So in a way, we've kind of compressed the journey. So I think a lot of coaching comes in where, yeah, they'll eventually learn it, but they're going to learn it better, or sorry, they're going to learn it faster if I start coaching it, right? I'm going to move this along. So
I think that's just one of the tendencies that Jukka was pointing to, this tailoristic assembly line. That's all about controlling the means of production and the amount of production, etc. So that's very ingrained in our culture and society still in the Western world, really.
Mark, can I mention the last
you to go ahead, Vlad?
Britton, I think that was your question the last time when I was here, that do we need the system of the game? And my reply was that it gives a sense of certainty. It gives a sense of safety to the parents that, hey, I give my kid to the club and that's what they're going to do. And I know that it's going to be happening. And just, you know, getting back to exactly to the Mark's comment that you know, there needs to be control in our mind, that we need to control it to make sure that nothing goes left and right. And, you know, that's my experience of, you know, living in Finland for 9 years and going through school in here and then going to Russia to present the coaching seminars there. And some of my ideas, funny enough, more accepted by the older generation of coaches than by the younger ones who were just transitioning from the professional game into the coaching, because they believe the right way of coaching is the way how they've been coached on a pro level. And the same thing would be acceptable with the U8 and U10s and so on. And I get the comments that, hey, Vlad, you know, great Russian for a Finn, but, you know, but your methods out here, I don't think they're going to work. And then the next coach with who I would interact who coached at the World Juniors, who coached at the Olympic Games, comes to me, hey, Vlad, that's you know, that's how I believe things need to be working. So, you know, thinking about my background in Russia, that's interesting to see how, you know, despite the stereotype that everything is so controlled, that there are coaches who think in a way that, okay, maybe things are happening in a bit more non-linear fashion than the linear one.
Yeah. To that point as well, I mean, if we turn it back on like the institution that's responsible, I mean, I would say, particularly using one that I live in, it's turning a corner. I mean, we're no longer even taking the same approach to coach education as an assembly line. And that's making people uncomfortable now that are coming on the course. You see that. They actually go from A to B. When they've left the course, they want to be at B. And we're saying there is no endpoint here. Like, you're going to explore this. We're going to facilitate this. We're going to ask problems. We're going to poke holes in a lot of the things that we do, some things that we need to explore. So yeah, I mean, this is a question I have though for Jukka, because he mentioned that idealistically he stuck to his guns he wanted to stick to his guns when he was with the Slovak organization, but slowly started to understand that society is going to influence obviously where he can get. I guess my question to you, Jukka, is, well, what is the next step then? If you think that society is not willing to come along, and I think you used the phrase when we were emailing, if they're going to be passive, how do you move it? How do you move it? And apologies, I really want to hear this. And Jukka, you are on mute because I heard the game was getting closer to you and you might be
Okay. So yeah, that was by accident. But what I was thinking while I listened to you speak, I kind of it's kind of a complicated issue because I see that this is all comes down really much to kind of a value, self-image, identity. So if the whole society around us, parents, teachers, everybody is kind of they behave in a certain way, and we are building our identity, self-image all the time by meeting these kind of expectations. And as a part of that, you get down to all this kind of a controlling behavior. If I want to be a good coach, I have to do these things in order. I'm expected to treat the players like this. The worthiness of me coaching is going to be dictated by whether my team wins or loses. So what we've discussed always or sometimes then with, especially in Finland, is that okay, how do you then create a system where you get people to face this kind of a positive identity crisis? Because a lot of the people who they start changing and are kind of a speaks person for this change in Finland, the older experienced successful coaches, they usually come down with the fact that, well, for me the change happened when I was fired or when I had to rebuild kind of my identity as a coach. And the question is that, okay, how do we then, if we want to move this forward at the system level, I think it's extremely, and especially these Eastern European countries, which are heavily still dependent on the certain type of industry, and with that certain type of labor force, it's going to be extremely difficult for them to change this approach. I know many teachers in Slovakia, for example, who and coaches who would be kind of or who are struggling now, that they can't really express themselves at the work like they would want to, because of the fact that they are surrounded by such a different expectations. So I think that what is needed, and this comes down to also those national governing bodies, that first of all you kind of there has to be a kind of a I don't know if the statement of purpose is kind of the right term in this sense, but you need change agents to move this forward, whether it's a person or organization, and you need to express your willingness to move in this direction. But that alone is not enough, but at least it shows the people that this is where you want to be. Then you of course need those examples. You need to, and whether it's a small isolated thing or the way how you set up, let's say, the whole club environment, you need those kind of examples, and you need to benchmark those, spread those, and encourage those, that this type of behavior. I think that's the only way to move. I feel when you start having that, and the experience that we had a lot of resistance. For example, this Vlad probably doesn't remember, but when we started in 2012, we had a lot of more experienced teachers who were really struggling with this change, but later came back or actually turned out to be the loudest spokespersons for this whole change. So we need to be kind of a persistent for this. You need leadership when you want to kind of really introduce these changes. You need enough people, enough organizations around to develop these kind of solutions. So basically to have the same purpose, and with that, I think then there's a chance for this kind of a positive disease to slowly spread. I don't know if this is a good reference now at this time in the middle of pandemic, but kind of I kind of see it a little bit the same way, that good things still have a tendency to spread when they get enough space to grow. And
yeah, I can relate to that, Jukka, because soccer in Nova Scotia, there's a lot of, I'd say, there's a lot of younger leaders who are trying to, I think, battle for these changes. The system around us, the wider sports, is not having this conversation at all. They want the assembly line approach, and we're always against it because the examples that we always get thrown at us is, well, that's not what they do. And then we've been doing this for 10 years and et cetera, et cetera. And we don't have the examples on the other side to try and build that connection, to try and move the conversation further. I mean, I actually have to use Mark's club, but then the reality is we are in two different cultures. So we've got, again, it's not the right example, but we don't have any local examples to really demonstrate what it is we're trying to do.
Yes.
Mike, and I came into Virmaki in 2015, and I can refer to what Jukka said. My positive identity crisis happened in my first year there. That like, wow, it can be done other way. And then I was very fortunate in my last year, like during the summer, I was working in the camp with one professional Finnish coach named Erkka Westerlund, who is, Jukka, if I'm not mistaken, he was the founder of the DP program. And like, I learned so much from him, that how much of athlete-centered and autonomy supportive coaching you can do on a professional level, even though he was coaching the Russian team. And then, you know, it's a long story what happened as a result. But what happened was that I was exposed and I was shown the example of, hey, that could be done differently. And it could be even done on a very high level. It just, you need to think a little bit and identify what are the routes I can take here or there to make sure that the environment that I create is actually beneficial for my athletes. And that was pretty much my bachelor thesis out there.
I think go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Mike.
No, I was just going to say, like, it's funny, like, I've got two hats. I've got the environment that you're responsible for with the players. I found that the types of environments we've built based on some of the theory that we're talking about, the kids love it, because in fact you're letting them off the hook, like you're letting them go. They can be creative, but it's that system part. And I've been in that chair when I've been trying to try and influence the system. It has been a struggle. It has been a struggle. So yeah, it's a weird one, because you've got your own specific culture, your subculture, if you will, within your team, but then you've got the wider culture. The wider one, I don't know. I mean, it's something I'm continuing to try and figure out and solve.
Oh yeah, and for myself, I'm been born and raised in Russia pretty much, and now these 9 years in Finland, that had quite a great impact on me in the way how I see learning and how I see coaching. But nevertheless, there is still a little bit of Russia living within me in the way how I approach things, because that's just, you cannot take the culture out, with everything without it. Plus, both of my parents are working in school, so to an extent, I have that that little part of me that is still out there. And it's when I speak with my colleagues from Russia, they can see that, hey, your mind is kind of there, but you're a bit different in a way how you are talking about things. Right. And like I said, there are people who do understand me, and there are people who are a bit challenging my current beliefs.
Britain.
I keep kind of coming back to what are the goals and the objectives of the organization, whether it's a team or whether it's a club, whether it's a governing body. What is it that the Finnish Federation wants out of all of this? Like, what are they trying to do?
Well, it's not. I mean, I say this all the time. We want in particularly yours and mine, Britain, we want as many kids and members playing the sport, loving the sport, and being active in the sport. That's our job. Our job isn't the 1% or if the 0.1%, if you will. But again, that is that cultural belief that they have to get them to that point. And it's very challenging to even though it makes so much sense, and it's not difficult to actually explicitly describe what our purpose is, it's still pushed back by many because you're not, hanging your hat on that you're going to get them to the professional level. They just don't want to hear it.
Mark, what is it at AIK, especially in the youth?
Objectives. We have three main goals.
Yeah.
Since 2017, since we removed the early selection, we started making some structural and pedagogical changes in how we're pedagogically working, using both experiential knowledge and empirical knowledge. So the strategy, if you want to call it, I don't like to call it strategy, it's kind of aims would be: the first one is the well-being of children. Second is to follow the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Children and governing documents in Swedish sport. And the third is to have more players playing in under 16, under 17, under 19 and senior teams.
When you say more players, Mark, do you mean that have come through your... Yes, right.
Staying in our system all the way up.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. I mean, if we can have, I think in our measurements, Britain, I don't know if you have senior programs, but if we have more kids that are playing in our senior program for fun, for social reasons, when they're doing their day and they've come through our club youth system, we've done it. That for me that's what we're after. And if one or two go on to bigger and better things, that's great. But for me, the bigger achievement is the fact that we've got more people involved.
Of course.
And I'd be shocked if any governing body told you otherwise, because, and particularly in North America, where the pyramid's upside down, the more people playing, the more money that goes to the federation.
It's true. I think that's like a pretty clear goal. But then when we kind of trace some of the steps back, in order to create some kind of excitement, we start selling the elite level, this or that or whatever, and then this system becomes discriminatory and we're working against ourselves, right? But it's interesting. I battle with this in our environment because if you go to the website and you look at the actions of the club and the coaches and everything, I think we're supporting our mission to keep kids active and to kind of support an active lifestyle. This is why we introduce them to other sports, and it's not so soccer specific, but it seems like the appetite in the market is really for elite and the best. And we're still a decent size organization, but I find that it seems like people more or less default to the clubs that saying we're going to develop the elite players. Right, we're the pathway to MLS and that sort of thing.
What is elite for children? Like, what does that even look like?
Yeah, and it's advertising, but then you're in a privatized. This is a market, right? And the mission, the nonprofit mission, has to be marketed to some extent so that people don't fall into this system again that's discriminatory against late matures. It's discriminatory against those that don't want to train 3, 4, 5 times a week, and it's discriminatory against players that don't have the financial or family resources to make it to trainings, games, tournaments, traveling, that sort of thing.
Actually, can you turn Jukka back on, please? Is he?
Okay, there you go.
Yes, I can.
I have a question just relevant to something that Britton said there. I mean, I guess one thing, and this is the discussion we had last week with Perttu, is that because of the geographical nature of Finland, there can be quite large distances between towns and between teams. And how are you looking to? Have you any thoughts on this? Because there's a tendency then to get the best players that are the best with the best as soon as possible to go on and play the next.
Yes. This is in general. This is getting better, but I think personally that this is now we are talking about one of the, and you were mentioning it earlier, also in the discussions that we also in Finland, we still see the same, that the system is selecting for the kids, not the kids choosing. You don't get these kind of a sport buffet environments where you would be exposed to different type of environments. You start practicing 3, 4, 5 times a week quite early on, before the kid is actually able to mature enough to decide what they want for themselves. But more and more discussion now is taking place that, okay, how do we build more flexibility? And one thing what has happened in many sports is that sort of the competition system is developed from the perspective that we don't use time to travel. So try to create kind of this principle of trying to create meaningful games for all the kids as close as possible. So this principle up to the age of 16, 17. And then you perhaps, when you start looking at the situation that you can expect kind of with the identity development and all that to youth to start making their own decisions, that what is the value of different things in their life, then you can start discussing that, okay, do we need more competition? Do we need more competitive environment? Is that then a way to go in terms of finding the best environment to move players forward? But not to do it too soon, especially in a country like Finland, where you then there's a cost side to it. So with all the travel and also the fact that then big part of the time is used extremely inefficiently. And don't get me wrong, I don't mean that all the time the kids are using should be efficient use of time, but time away from the rest, the play, the social time, or the nice practice time. So but of course then when you look at the kids 13, 14, 15, 12, 13, 14, even I think 15, 16, the social time with the team together is also important. And in that sense, the travel sometimes to reasonable limits, I think that's one reason how to justify that.
Yeah, but isn't there a problem with a lot of this? I mean, I know in North America, there's a problem with these travel teams. They end up becoming some sort of elite socio-economical club.
Yep. Yes. And I think this is what when I was listening to your discussion, that a lot of the national governing bodies at the international level, I don't know so much national level, but especially the international federation asked more and more, they are acknowledging this problem. We've had this trend already for some time, and you really don't see the results. This kind of early selection, all these kind of select teams, and that you end up having a lot of overuse injuries when you focus too much in specific sport. You end up having burnout and these kind of issues. So I think at least at the when we look at the international governing bodies, the evidence is already so strong that if they want to, if they really kind of are ready to decision makers are ready to look at the existing evidence, I think there's a quite good consensus that, well, this is not the way to work. But I think now the question is that what is the kind of the new setup, new system, and how do we then spread that information so that it goes to all different clubs or groups that organize sports in general. So
good. Yeah, good stuff, gentlemen. Jukka, what's the score, by the way?
We are leading 1-0, so it's they obviously they don't need coach. Let the kids play.
It's usually the case.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Mark, Vlad, Britain, anything else you guys would like to ask before we start to wrap this up?
No, I think it's good. I think I don't know what I think exactly. We wrapped up a really intense period of time where it seems like the majority of our efforts have been marketing, less coaching, less focused on those things. And those aren't the things that bring me joy in particular. But I think that understanding that this cultural influence means that people are going to want a certain experience for their child before the child has, really explicitly said what they want out of their experience.
Yep.
So, the kid enjoys soccer, and then in turn, mom and dad want them to have the best training or to, be on the best team, because they're worried about where they'll end up if they're forgotten, if they're dismissed. It's kind of an interesting thing. I think in some regards, if we see examples of us, working against ourselves and our objectives. And so I think it's good to hear that I don't know, our systems and our governing bodies are taking steps to, I guess, that fall in line with their objectives. And I think we just have to be mindful of what maybe prevents us from achieving those objectives, because we are looking for a shorter, faster pathway.
I would say this though, Britton, and I was having this conversation only today, this morning. I think there are more families and more kids that they're just quieter. They're just not a loud minority that want all this, quick success. So I think for me, it's a question I've asked myself as well, is I think there is more of an audience of people that just want what's best for their kids and let it happen and emerge naturally. And I'm going to die on that hill. And I think we have to decide which hill are you willing to die on as a professional. And maybe it could be, as you said, because it's so highly marketed, it could be a career suicide in some sense, but if it don't make you happy, why do it?
Yeah. Yeah.
And we only get one go at it, right?
Yep.
Marky boy, anything besides getting ready to go back out for a tan?
No. I have some writing to do. Me and Vlad have a little project, and I've been working on it all day. So.
Oh, little project.
I know.
Again, getting back to the social cultural impact on the learning, discovering a bit of that with Mark on the background.
Coming soon.
Yeah.
Share it along when you've got all the answers, eh?
No, just better questions as usual.
Oh yeah.
Just better questions. I think one thing is just for Jukka to say, I think that Finland might be in an interesting position at the moment due to the international recognition. It's what do you call it, primary school. It's school system has got, particularly for kids up to 12, 13. So I think there are some seeds have been planted there, Jukka. Would you agree?
Yes, I would agree. And there's a lot of organizations like ours, and basically we are in a good situation because let's say Finnish Ministry of Education is fighting the same fight.
That's really good.
Yes. So you basically, there's a chance to slowly move things forward. A lot of, like it was mentioned, a lot of the parents are expecting different type of environment for their kids at schools and with sports as well. So I don't think there's nothing stopping the change anymore to really evolve and move forward. But based on my experience, there's really big differences on how this whole issue is being preserved and how, what is the readiness of different countries really to implement these kind of things.
I was asked by one Finnish coach who coached for quite many years now on international level, Vlad, what do you think? When is Russia going to change the paradigm? I answered, might take a while, but the thing is that what we mentioned it, throughout, I believe now a couple of episodes out here, that first we need to recognize what are the strengths in the system first of all, and what can we build on, what are the bright spots in the system, that we can, create the inertia for the change, and then slowly but surely work on the limitations and, mix the experiential and empirical knowledge and create the best practices out of it.
Yeah. Well said.
Good.
Well said.
Cool.
Well, Jukka, again, sorry, I have to keep muting you in and out. I think the game gets closer to you, and then we can hear all the cheering. But want to thank you for coming on, Vlad. Again, brilliant. Obviously, information to obviously a very interesting subject. Britain, I'm with you, man. Just keep exploring and trying to figure this out.
No, we're good. It's just that the last 3 weeks has been like, oh, what are we doing?
Yeah, I'm with you, buddy. I'm right there next to you. Mark, pleasure as always.
Thank you.
Okay, guys.
Thank you
Mike,
also
thanks for
from my behalf, and thank you for basically keeping up the discussion for the good things.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, and I have to highlight, not so often that your supervisor is with you on the same podcast.
Yeah. Cheerio, guys.
Okay.